Welcome to All About Money on HKIBC. I'm Chloe Feng. After 3 long years, the wait for holidays abroad is finally over as more places in East Asia, including Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, relax COVID curbs and stringent border controls. Airlines, too, are eager to make up for the losses suffered in the pandemic. But the sector realizes that there's still a long way to go before returning to the good old days when air travel was convenient and fares were competitive. Brandon Sobie of Singapore-based consultancy Sobie Aviation joins me to discuss how recovery in the aviation sector can be speeded up. Welcome to the program, Brandon.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start by talking about some positive changes in Hong Kong this week. Now, the Hong Kong-based air crew who previously had to self-isolate in hotels during their overseas trips now will be allowed to go out of their hotel rooms and explore the layover cities. However, they're still suggested to avoid mass gatherings or bars. So I'm thinking, what do you think about this change for the air crew to scrap the hotel quarantine in their overseas trips? Would it be sufficient enough to recover, for example, Hong Kong's flagship airline Cathay Pacific's momentum in the recovery?
Well, I think it helps attract air crew and helps retain air crew and helps Hong Kong airlines, including Cathay, to recruit air crew because with these restrictions, it was very unattractive to the position, the job of flight attendant. So it helps from that perspective. There's been a lot of restrictions on crew, the so-called closed loop flying, which were in place for a long time in Hong Kong, and this just represents the latest step of kind of a normalization of the normal way that crew will work. So it's a resumption of the normal. And most of the other markets in Asia Pacific, really all of them except for mainland China have already resumed kind of normal life in terms of crew and normal, rotations and no more restrictions for several months. So this kind of allows Hong Kong to catch up and allows Cathay Pacific to hopefully attract crew and retain crew, as well as make crew usage of crew and deployment of crew more efficient.
But actually, there are also some concerns. For example, the Hong Kong Air Crew Officers Association this week expressed that they are very concerned about the airline's lack of readiness to regain its status as a global aviation leader. And meanwhile, for example, compare with Singapore's flagship carrier, Singapore Airlines, which now has about 70% of passenger capacity pre-pandemic levels. Cathay Pacific is only operating at a roughly 10%, while aiming to boost that to about 25% by the end of the year. How long do you think they can really catch up with the Singapore Airlines, for example?
Yeah, I mean, Singapore is just one example. It's not about Singapore Airlines versus Cathay. It's about the Hong Kong market versus, other markets in the world and most other markets in Asia Pacific, because, the borders reopened in Southeast Asia, for example, in April for the most part. So that's 6 months ago. So these markets have had kind of a 6 months head start. And of course, if you look at markets in other regions, South Asia or Europe or North America, the head start is even more exacerbated. So it's going to take a while, and we just kind of have to hope that Hong Kong and Cathay Pacific will follow the same curves that Singapore and other markets in Asia Pacific have followed once they opened up. In August, the traffic levels in Singapore were almost 60% pre-COVID levels, while in Hong Kong it was only about 8%. Cathay was at about 9%, and Singapore Airlines was over 60%. So, or at least Singapore Airlines Group. So it's the numbers are it's not even comparable, really. I mean, one airline in one market is well on the path to recovery and is operating in a mainly open market, while the other is the recovery has not even started yet. This is only just the beginning. This kind of next few months, the fourth quarter is just the beginning of the recovery for Hong Kong and Cathay. So it's going to take time, obviously, and we just have to hope that the momentum continues, and that Cathay and Hong Kong can follow a similar growth trajectory or recovery trajectory as some of the other markets.
Right. And Cathay Pacific also said that it would take time for them to rebuild their capacity as well. And in terms of the hindrance, I assume that the staff shortage is also one of the major factors affecting their recovery as well. And Cathay Pacific is now also setting up a recruitment fair to hire more staff. But I mean, how can we really lure those talents back? Do you have any suggestions on this as well?
Again, Hong Kong and Cathay Pacific are following what other markets and other airlines in the region have done several months ago, which is first of all, bring back staff that are still available, and then hire, because a lot of the staff that they had pre-COVID, either were let go or they left because they didn't want to stick around over this horrific pandemic period. And I think the biggest thing is again, the job has to be attractive, and Hong Kong has to be attractive as a place to live. And the most important thing about the recent measures, I would say, in Hong Kong are that it's getting things closer to normal and closer to what other markets have been experiencing for several months. So it makes it easier to recruit and to fill those positions. Cathay Pacific has had plans to hire for several months now, and they outlined these plans several months ago. But there was a couple of issues. One is that the implementation timelines were very difficult to kind of manage because they didn't know when Hong Kong was going to open, and you can't invest in bringing back aircraft and hiring crew and so forth until you have a kind of some certainty in the recovery timeline and in the reopening timelines. So they had a plan, but the implementation timelines were kind of a bit murky. And the other thing, of course, is that it's hard to actually find people because a lot of these people have to be recruited from overseas if Hong Kong's not attractive as a place to work, and if the job's not attractive, if you have closed loop flying, or you're stuck in hotels when you're overseas during your rest periods. That makes the job completely unattractive relative to similar jobs in other countries. So I think it's only a start. I mean, these last steps again make it possible for Cathay Pacific to start recruiting more, because there's a little bit more certainty in the recovery timeline and the reopening of Hong Kong. And there's also the jobs are somewhat more attractive than they were 6 months ago, because people can move to Hong Kong confident that it's a decent place to live and a decent place to work. Until recently, that just wasn't the case. So it's very difficult, and there's still a lot of other challenges and uncertainties to overcome. This is the first step really in the reopening process.
And other than solving the manpower shortages issue, what else do you think that should be prioritized for an airline to recover better?
Well, the market has to continue to reopen. It can't just be stuck at the in a partial reopened state. So there has to be some certainty and some timelines behind what would be eventually a full reopening. So the 0+3 doesn't do much for the inbound market. The inbound market would be people visiting Hong Kong, which accounted for over 40% of the overall market pre-COVID. It's a massive market. Hong Kong is a very attractive destination, but it's not attractive even under 0+3 because it doesn't compete with other destinations that don't have these requirements. Most other destinations in the world have completely eliminated all testing, don't have any health monitoring requirements. So if you're sitting in another country and looking for a place to go on holiday, Hong Kong is going to be very low on your list until it's kind of more competitive as a destination with zero requirements in terms of testing and health monitoring, and also no restrictions once you're here, so you can fully enjoy yourself. I mean, that's just the reality. You have to have that right in this day and age to be a competitive as a destination, because most destinations have that. If we were talking about like 6 or 9 months ago, that would be a different scenario, because most destinations still had testing and other requirements. But in this day and age, in today's environment, it's not competitive to have these issues. So we need to have some certainty over when a full reopening will occur, because the current initiative or the current recent announcements really just open up, I would say, more of the outbound market, which is Hong Kong residents ability to leave and come back, because now they can come back and they don't have to quarantine. They just have to be monitored for a few days. But because of the testing even there, people are less likely to take less frequent trips than they would otherwise. So the outbound market will partially recover. The inbound market will really not recover much at all. And again, that's a big chunk of the market. And then the third segment of the market is transit, which should start to pick up, because a lot of the restrictions on crew and made it very difficult for transit. In fact, during much of the pandemic, Hong Kong completely banned transit. So transit can start picking up, but also transit is contingent on the networks being restored and the flights being restored. So you kind of need both outbound and inbound to kind of come back, and then that helps transit, because you just have more capacity overall, more connectivity overall to attract the transit traffic.
And also on the Hong Kong airport capacity, I know that is due kind of under a trial as well, because previously it conducted trials to try to see if they can cope with increased demand for the arrivals as well. And the Singapore airport, however, managed to avoid chaotic scenes, which are seen in some other international airports in foreign countries. So I'm thinking, can you also tell us if we can learn some lessons from the smooth reopening from the Singapore airport? What can we learn from them?
Well, I mean, Singapore managed it very carefully, and also, the recovery was, I would say, more gradual than the recovery that we saw in Europe or North America or other markets that have had more chaotic airport scenes. So in other markets, we had, traffic was at 10-20% normal levels in January or February, as things were set back due to Omicron, and staffing levels were reduced accordingly. And then all of a sudden, Omicron passed very quickly, and things just kind of snapped back to almost full demand and normal, endemic kind of situation very quickly. And so you had traffic, go from like, say, 10-20% of normal to like 70-80% of normal in just a few months. That didn't happen in Asia generally, even the markets that opened. The reason is the biggest reason is actually China. So the markets in Asia, including Singapore, are quite heavily reliant on China pre-COVID, and compared to, say, markets in Europe or Middle East or North America, where China and North Asia generally accounts for a very small percentage of the total. So the traffic has recovered, I would say, more gradually in Singapore and other markets in Asia. And also, to the credit of airports, not only Singapore but other airports in the region, they manage the situation a lot differently than, say, the airports in Europe, or manage the situation, which is they, from the very beginning after the reopening in April, were quite proactive at making sure that capacity or a number of flights didn't increase beyond their capability, their manpower capabilities. They were very closely monitoring manpower at the airport. And this is not actually airport staff. This is generally ground handlers and other companies and ecosystem security providers and so forth. So the airport's operator or the airport companies themselves actually don't have very much staff. It's actually a lot of other companies kind of operating at the airport. But the airports in Asia, including and many of the airports in Asia, including Changi Airport in Singapore, managed it very carefully. We're looking at the manpower levels at their airport, that were provided by these companies, and they made sure that flights weren't added too fast, and they also made sure that the flights were kind of spread around. Not that all the flights would be like added at a certain time of day, because that would create a crunch. So they were just more proactive at managing the situation. And because China's still closed, you can't recover that much of the market without China. So you're not going to go from 20% or 10% in this case to 80%. You're going to go from like 10% to 30% to 50%, and then eventually hit 80%, which is where Singapore maybe will be early next year, which is kind of the maximum you can hit without mainland China reopening. And then eventually, of course, mainland China reopens, at some point next year, hopefully, although nobody really knows. And then you can finally, get up to 90 to 100%. So I don't think we should be too overly concerned that there'll be chaos in Hong Kong.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Brandon. We'll take a short break for now, and coming up next, we'll have more discussions on the outlook of the aviation industry in the Asia-Pacific area, so don't go away. Welcome back to All About Money on HKIBC. I'm Chloe Feng. Independent aviation analyst Brendan Sobie is still with us. In the previous section, we talked about Cathay Pacific's recovery and compared how the international airports in Hong Kong and Singapore are coping with a return to normality. We're now focused on the Asia's region in general, especially as more countries are opening up ahead of the year-end holiday season. So now, let's also shift our focus, for example, in Japan, because Japan is also, signaling is opening up with the international community and international travel as well. So how would you rate the current status or readiness in their international airports, for example, at the Narita airports?
Yeah, I mean, so Japan is, just finally had their announcement, a week or so ago about fully reopening to inbound traffic as of the 11th of October. This was anticipated for a couple of months. So a lot of the airlines were already kind of planning this, and of course the industry, including the airports, were preparing for this, as is typically the case in Japan. Things happen in a very kind of prepared way and a very well managed way. So I think we'll see a recovery in traffic as inbound Japan really picks up, because previously inbound was pretty much just not happening at all, because there was quotas and there was all these restrictions, and they had some limited number of group travel come into Japan the last few months, but very, very small numbers because of all the restrictions and requirements and quotas that were in place. So we'll see a pickup in the inbound market, starting this month, but also particularly going into, the peak season towards the end of the year. And the airports, have had a relatively low level in international traffic, but Japan has been doing a lot better than, say, Hong Kong or certainly mainland China or Taiwan, because the outbound market, and the transit market have been open for some time. So if you look at like Narita's traffic levels, even before all of this, they were almost at 30% pre-COVID levels, which is relatively high compared to, say, the other markets that were closed, although still lower than the markets, say, in Southeast Asia that were fully open.
Right, and I noticed that South Korea's, for example, Seoul Incheon Airport is also operating quite well at 30% something percentage points pre-pandemic level, and with more regions being opened up, for example, in Taiwan, South Korea, more regions in the Eastern Asia as well. How would you think this could boost the whole Asia's aviation recovery in the short term as well?
Yeah, so I mean, all the markets are hoping that there will be a further pickup in traffic. Those markets that are open, so like Southeast Asia, Australia, these are markets that have been open for some time, but are around 50-60% recovered at the moment. They with Japan and opening up, Japan's a significant market for all these countries or all these markets, so that will boost the recovery. If you have a recovery rate of already at 50-60%, and Japan opens, and Hong Kong opens, and Taiwan opens, and South Korea further opens. South Korea technically was open, but had similar levels of traffic to Japan, actually, because they still had testing requirements which were just lifted. So you could visit Korea, but not many people were visiting Korea. It was mainly outbound travelers that were recovering, had a partial recovery in Korea so far, just because the PCR tests were still required, and that made it unattractive. So but that's now lifted, so you're going to see a lot of people traveling in the next few months to Korea and Japan from these other markets or other regions of Southeast Asia, which will further boost their recovery rate, up from what is already 50-60% in many cases. It could add another 10 or 20%. Hong Kong and Taiwan also, I would say that also will lead to a bit of a further boost. But Hong Kong and Taiwan are smaller than Japan in terms of the market size. But also, as we were discussing before, with Hong Kong, the inbound market is not going to recover quite yet. And same thing with Taiwan. Taiwan has, is opening up. But it's not actually fully opening up. So it's there's an outbound traffic from Taiwan will improve significantly like it will from Hong Kong, but inbound is still not going to happen because you still have testing requirements and other restrictions. So it's Japan actually I think is a bigger driver just because it's a larger market and because it's a full reopening both inbound and outbound, while with Taiwan and Hong Kong it's more of a partial reopening and a smaller market.
Right, and also in terms of the airfares, because now we're seeing, the airfares are still quite expensive compared with, pre-pandemic levels in some occasions. I'm thinking, when do you think the fee for air tickets could also be more regularized? When can we see that happen?
Probably sometime next year, but it's extremely hard to predict. So airfares are just basically are based on capacity and demand. So right now there is under capacity. There's a supply demand imbalance. There's way more demand than capacity in the market. It does depend on where you're flying, which route, and which country. But I mean, generally speaking, there is this imbalance right now because there was so much pent up demand when borders reopened, and capacity has been slow to come back into the system because it takes time for airlines to reactivate aircraft, to hire crew or rehire crew, to train crew, and so forth. So and this imbalance is going to continue, certainly for the rest of this year, and of course with with other markets now reopening, that adds kind of another wave of demand. Like the Japan wave of demand is going to start kicking in now, and that's again it kind of makes it the imbalance even bigger potentially for the short time, for the next few months at least. After that, I think we can see an improvement in the airfare situation just because capacity will come back into the market. And demand will probably at some point plateau and maybe even decline. The economic situation, the economic indicators at the moment are not very positive for next year. We might be looking at a recessionary environment, and plus, in the first several months, every time a market reopens for the first time, there's always a lot of pent-up demand, people who want to travel that haven't been able to travel for a couple of years. So once we get through that pent-up demand wave and we get into next year, when the pent-up demand wave will probably have abated for the most part, and we have potentially a recessionary environment, demand will not be as high, and at the same time supply will be much higher, because at that point a lot of the aircraft that airlines are working to reactivate now will be reactivated, and a lot of the people that they're trying to hire now and the process of hiring and training will be in place by then. So once that happens, the supply-demand imbalance ends, and we have, potentially more even capacity and supply, or even overcapacity, depending on the economic situation and demand situation. There's overcapacity, which a lot of the Asia market was suffering from pre-COVID. You'll actually see very low airfares. So bad for airline profitability, good for consumers.
And also in the Asia Pacific area, can you remind us, where are we now in terms of the recovery status, compared with the pre-pandemic levels? And how long do you think, for example, we can catch up with the strong market situation that we have been seeing in the European or the American markets?
Yeah, so Asia Pacific, from an international traffic perspective, is, it's about 40%. That figures from August. So I think at the moment it's probably more like 45%. In terms of international traffic. In terms of domestic traffic, it varies depending on the market, but a lot of domestic markets are nearly fully recovered or fully recovered. But in terms of international traffic, and of course, like Hong Kong is 100% international, they don't have a domestic market. The overall market is still a bit less than half recovered. But if you peel that back, you see a lot of variations. Southeast Asia, has because it's been open for several months. Most of the markets in Southeast Asia are now more than 50% recovered. Like Singapore, for example, is 60% recovered. And then if you look at South Asia, like India, for example, it's even like 80% recovered because they opened even earlier. They, have a lot of traffic to other regions like the Middle East, for example, and Europe, and are not very reliant on China, unlike Southeast Asia. So in fact, there's very little traffic between India and China, or South Asia and China. So they're not reliant on that China and North Asian market. So they're actually much more recovered. Of course, globally speaking, the recovery rate is like about 75% now. But again, you peel that back and you'll see much higher than 75% in places like Europe, Middle East, North America, and of course lower in Asia Pacific. As I was saying, it's about 45% maybe in Asia Pacific now.
Right. Thank you very much for your thoughts today, Brandon. That's Brandon Sobie, independent analyst with Sobie Aviation. Appreciate your time. And thank you for watching All About Money. We'll be back on HKIBC next Sunday night. Until the next time, please take care.